Oh, so let's unpack this story. Imagine a quiet rural community, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're grappling with this invisible enemy, a disease so terrifying, it actually drove them to embrace a belief that, well, it sounds like something straight out of a horror novel.
Yeah.
We're talking about a real-life incident where fear and desperation led to a truly bizarre and ultimately tragic event in a New England town.
And what's really fascinating here is how this late 19th century terror of consumption, what we now know as tuberculosis, how it intersected with these really deeply ingrained folk beliefs.
Right.
It led to one of the most meticulously documented cases of exhumation, digging someone up, specifically to banish what they thought was an undead manifestation.
Wow.
And this wasn't just some local rumor. It became the sort of grim national story.
So today, that's exactly what we're diving into. We're looking at excerpts from The Mysterious Case of Mercy Brown, a real-life vampire story from North American cryptids. And our mission, really, is to explore the chilling facts of Mercy Brown's story, the immense fears that drove her community, and the genuinely surprising details that were unearthed during this very public investigation of her grave. So let's set the scene. Our story begins in Exeter, Rhode Island. We're talking late 1800s.
Yeah. Picture a rural farming community. Looks picturesque, probably, on the surface.
Sure.
But it's a community living under this constant, really devastating shadow.
And that shadow was consumption.
Exactly. Tuberculosis. It was just relentless, a leading cause of death back then. And there was absolutely no known cure, no reliable treatment, nothing.
That's hard to imagine now.
Yeah, I mean, imagine watching your family, your friends slowly waste away, coughing up blood, phlegm, just fading. It was this terrifying, drawn-out way to die, and it left people feeling utterly helpless.
And the Brown family of Exeter, they knew this devastation all too well. It hit them hard.
Very hard.
First, the mother, Mary Eliza, she died from it in 1884. Then, just 2 years later, 1886, the older daughter, Mary Olive, she also died from consumption.
Tragic.
Then, in 1891, the disease strikes again. It infects Mercy Brown. She was born in 1872, so quite young, and also her brother, Edwin.
Right, Edwin.
And Edwin, he actually tried to get away, moved to Colorado Springs, hoping the climate would help his health.
A common strategy, then.
But it didn't work. He came back to Exeter in 1892, and he was actually in worse condition.
Oh, no.
And then Mercy herself died. January 1892. She was only 19.
Just 19.
So you have this environment of just complete helplessness. This disease is picking off family members one after another. There's no medical explanation they can grasp onto.
None at all.
I mean, the desperation in Exeter must have been overwhelming.
Absolutely.
And that's when this really terrifying belief starts to take hold, doesn't it? That one of the dead family members was somehow draining Edwin's life, like a vampire.
Yeah.
Was this just some isolated local superstition?
Yeah.
Or was this idea of vampirism actually, kind of common in New England then?
That's a really great question, and it's key to understanding this. It wasn't unique to Exeter at all, not by a long shot.
Really?
Yeah, you have to remember, in a world without our modern medical understanding, communities often turn to, ancient fears. Folklore. It was a way to try and explain these relentless, mysterious illnesses.
It gave them something to blame, I guess.
Exactly. These beliefs provided a desperate explanation, irrational maybe, but an explanation nonetheless, for a disease that medicine just couldn't touch. It offered a sort of tangible enemy where science saw, nothing much yet.
So there were other cases.
Oh, yes. There are several documented cases across New England during this period of people exhuming bodies for these kinds of anti-vampire rituals. It really speaks to that deep human need for agency, for answers, when you're faced with something overwhelming and inexplicable.
Okay, so George Brown, Mercy's father, he must have been devastated, losing his wife, 2 daughters. Now his son is fading fast.
Unimaginable.
And initially, he was skeptical about this whole vampire theory. Understandably.
Right. It sounds outlandish to us, and probably did to him, too, at first.
But with Edwin getting worse, and this intense pressure from neighbors, friends, people convinced this was the only way.
Yeah, the community pressure must have been immense.
He eventually agreed. He allowed the exhumation of his wife and daughters. It must have been an absolutely agonizing decision, made out of sheer desperation, really.
Pure desperation. No other way to see it.
So fast forward to March 17th, 1892. It's cold. And this somber group gathers, villagers, a local doctor.
Even a newspaper reporter, interestingly enough, which is partly why we know so much detail.
Right, so it wasn't some secret thing. It was a very public, collective act. Fear and investigation rolled into one.
That's right. They proceeded to exhume the graves. First, Mary Eliza, the mother, and Mary Olive, the older sister. Their bodies showed, the expected signs of decomposition, normal for the time they'd been buried.
Okay, so nothing unusual there.
No. But then they opened Mercy's casket, and the findings were, well, they were shocking to the people there.
What did they see?
Her body was described as remarkably well preserved. The source specifically mentions her skin was still fresh, her hair and nails had grown, and her heart still contained blood.
Oh, wow. Okay. I can see how that would look bad.
Exactly. For those superstitious villagers, already primed to believe something was wrong.
That was it. Proof positive.
That was all the confirmation they needed. Mercy was undead. She had to be the one draining Edwin's life from the grave.
But hang on. Hair and nails appearing to grow. Liquid blood in the heart. These things have natural explanations, right?
Yeah.
Especially the preservation part.
Absolutely. And if we step back and look at the bigger picture, this moment perfectly highlights that stark contrast between pre-scientific belief and just simple physical reality.
So what was the real reason?
The rational explanation for Mercy's unusual preservation was actually quite straightforward, though they didn't grasp it then. She had died in January.
Right, winter.
Exactly. And she was placed in an above-ground crypt because the ground was frozen solid. That crypt essentially acted like a natural freezer through those cold winter months.
Ah, okay. So it slowed down decomposition massively.
Precisely. It prevented her body from decaying at a normal rate, especially compared to her mother and sister, who had been buried underground for much longer and during warmer periods.
It's a classic case of confirmation bias, isn't it?
Textbook. They already had this terrifying theory, this vampire idea,
Yeah.
So when they saw something unusual, Mercy's preserved body, even though there was a perfectly mundane explanation,
They immediately twisted it to fit their fear.
instantly, it had to be the vampire.
But the villagers, they didn't buy the simple explanation, did they? They stuck to their superstition.
No, they completely rejected it. They were convinced. And they believed a really gruesome ritual was the only way forward now.
This is where it gets even more disturbing.
It does. They proceeded to cut out Mercy's heart and her liver.
Oh my God.
Then, in this really chilling act, they took these organs to a nearby rock and burned them. Burned them
until they were ashes.
Yeah.
And then they mixed those ashes with water to create a sort of tonic.
A tonic? What on earth?
The purpose of this horrifying concoction in their minds was to give it to Edwin to drink.
No.
Yes. They believed that by consuming the ashes of the supposed vampire's heart and liver, he would somehow be cured of his consumption, released from her supernatural influence.
It was like fighting fire with fire, but in the most literal, gruesome way possible.
It was a desperate attempt to exert some kind of control over this disease that was completely out of control. A folk magic remedy born of terror.
And did it work? Did Edwin get better?
Tragically, no, it did not work.
Well, of course not.
Edwin died just 2 months later, May 2nd, 1892.
So all that horror, the desecration of Mercy's body,
Yeah.
it was for nothing.
Utterly for nothing.
Yeah.
Mercy's remains were then reburied in the Baptist Cemetery in Exeter. Her gravestone is actually still there today. A very somber reminder of this whole deeply human but horrific incident. Wow. Her story didn't end there, though, did it? It became quite famous.
No, it lived on. It got documented, written about, spread across the country, even beyond. It inspired books, stories. It still gets told today.
So when we look back at this, what are the enduring lessons? What does Mercy Brown's story really tell us today?
Well, I think what Mercy Brown's story truly illustrates isn't just, quaint historical superstition. It's a really powerful example of this innate human tendency we seem to have.
Which is?
To find clear causes, even if they're supernatural ones, when we're faced with overwhelming uncertainty or suffering. It's a phenomenon we still see today, right? In how we sometimes grapple with complex issues or health crises or things we don't understand.
We look for simple answers, even if they're wrong.
Exactly. It shows how deeply we crave control, or at least an explanation, even if it means inventing a vampire, to make sense of the inexplicable. This whole incident just lays bare how quickly fear and that desperate need for answers can override rational thought. Especially when there's no clear scientific understanding available. It can lead communities to irrational, even cruel acts.
So, just to be absolutely clear,
Yeah.
Mercy Brown was not a vampire.
Not even close. She was a victim of a terrible disease, tuberculosis, and then a victim of this tragic misunderstanding fueled by overwhelming, desperate fear in her community.
Her story really is a haunting reminder, isn't it? of a time when the inexplicable was so often blamed on the supernatural, and just how far human desperation can push people.
It truly is, and it leaves you with a thought, maybe a provocative one.
Go on.
Think about this. Today, we live in an age awash with information. We have scientific explanations literally at our fingertips for so many things.
Yeah.
But how susceptible are we still, right now, to narratives that offer those simple, maybe comforting, but ultimately irrational explanations for complex problems or deep-seated fears?
That's a really good question.
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How far have we truly come in our ability to critically evaluate the unknown and to resist blaming the vampire when things get scary?